What if the man chosen to save the United States looked nothing like a hero? He was too tall, too thin, too awkward. His clothes often seemed ill-fitted. His face was deeply lined before old age had truly come. His voice, when first heard, surprised many high, sharp, and strange rather than grand or musical. He had no famous family name. No military glory. No inherited fortune. No polished aristocratic charm. And yet, when America moved toward its darkest hour, this unlikely man rose above senators, generals, bankers, editors, and dynasties. His name was Abraham Lincoln, and before he became the president who preserved the Union, he was a child born in hardship, so humble that many doubted he belonged among the powerful at all. He entered the world on February 12, 1809. In a rough log cabin in Kentucky. There were no chandeliers. No servants. No libraries. No path marked for greatness. His father, Thomas Lincoln, worked with his hands. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, died when Abraham was still a boy, a loss that left a wound he carried for life. The frontier was not romantic. It was labor. Cold winters. Mud roads, axes biting wood from dawn to dusk, scarce money. Constant uncertainty. Young Abraham split rails, plowed fields, ferried boats, and did whatever survival demanded. But there was something unusual in him. He hungered for knowledge. Books were rare treasures in that world. He borrowed whatever he could: history, law, stories, scripture, grammar. He read by firelight. He reread passages until they became part of him. He studied not for school grades, but because his mind could not remain still. Neighbors noticed the tall boy who loved reading and telling stories. He could make people laugh with mimicry and sharp humor. He could also fall into deep silence. Those who knew him sensed to Lincoln's living in one man, the storyteller and the sorrow-bearer. As the family moved to Indiana and later Illinois, Lincoln entered adulthood with little formal education but enormous self-discipline. He worked as a store clerk, surveyor, postmaster, and laborer. He failed in business more than once. He knew embarrassment. He knew debt. He knew what it meant to begin again with nothing. That would matter later. Because leaders born into comfort sometimes collapse when the ground shakes. Lincoln had grown up on shaking ground. Then came politics. America in the early 19th century was loud, ambitious, argumentative, and expanding westward. Elections were festivals of speeches, newspapers, whiskey, insults, and grand promises. Lincoln loved ideas and persuasion. He joined the Whig Party, which favored economic development, infrastructure, and modernization. He believed roads, canals, railroads, and education could lift ordinary people. He believed society should reward effort, not merely inheritance. Most of all, he believed in opportunity. Not equality as modern Americans define it. Not yet. Lincoln was a man of his century, carrying many of its limitations, but he believed deeply that human beings should rise by labor freely chosen, not by labor stolen through slavery. That belief would sharpen over time. He served in the Illinois legislature. He briefly served in Congress. He became a lawyer and one of the finest in the West. Traveling by horseback and carriage through Illinois courts, Lincoln built a reputation for honesty, logic, and devastating clarity. He was not the smoothest speaker. He was often the most convincing. Judges trusted him, clients respected him, opponents feared being trapped in his reasoning. He could reduce confusion into plain truth. And plain truth is dangerous to those who profit from confusion. He married Mary Todd, intelligent, ambitious, politically connected, and emotionally intense. Their marriage was passionate, difficult, complicated, and marked by grief. Several of their children would die young. Loss followed Lincoln long before the White House. Meanwhile, the nation drifted toward fracture. The issue of slavery expanded with every new territory. Would the American West be free soil or slave soil? Could the Union remain balanced? Or had balance become impossible? Lincoln disliked slavery morally, but for years he focused politically on stopping its spread rather than demanding immediate nationwide abolition. He believed slavery degraded labor, corrupted Republican values, and threatened the future of ordinary white workers. He also understood blunt truths many ignored. If slavery spread everywhere, free labor would shrink. If slave-holding elites dominated the nation, democracy itself would warp. Then in 1854 came the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It opened territories to decide slavery by popular vote and effectively repealed earlier limits. Lincoln was enraged. He returned to politics with renewed force. This was no longer merely policy disagreement. This was the future character of America. At speeches across Illinois, Lincoln attacked the spread of slavery with moral seriousness and legal precision. He did not yet sound like a revolutionary. He sounded like a man warning that rotten the beams would soon bring down the house. Then came 1858. Lincoln challenged Stephen A. Douglas for the U.S. Senate. Douglas was famous, powerful, skilled, and nationally known. He was called the Little Giant, short in stature, immense in influence. The two men debated across Illinois before massive crowds. Farmers rode miles to attend. Newspapers printed transcripts nationwide. Americans sensed something larger than a Senate race was happening. Douglas defended popular sovereignty. Let settlers choose. Let democracy decide locally. Lincoln answered with a deeper question. Can any democracy remain morally stable if it treats human bondage as just another option? Then he spoke words that echoed across the nation. A house divided against itself cannot stand. He did not predict immediate collapse. He predicted eventual decision. America would become one thing or the other, more slave or more free. The debates made Lincoln famous. He lost the Senate race, but sometimes defeat is only rehearsal. By losing locally, he won nationally. Across the North, Republicans saw in Lincoln a rare gift. He opposed slavery's expansion firmly. He spoke plainly. He came from humble roots. He could connect with farmers, workers, professionals, immigrants, and moral reformers alike. He was radical enough for change, moderate enough for victory. Then in 1860, the political map exploded. The Democratic Party split between northern and southern factions. That fracture opened a path for Republicans. At the Chicago Convention, better-known men sought the nomination. William Seward seemed stronger. Salmon Chase seemed grander. Edward Bates seemed more established. But Lincoln's team worked skillfully. They presented him as electable, principled, Western, and less divisive than rivals. Ballot after ballot, support shifted. Then came triumph. Abraham Lincoln became the Republican nominee for president when news reached him in Springfield. He reportedly received it with restrained calm, but the nation reacted with thunder. Too many Northerners. Lincoln represented renewal. Too many Southern elites. He represented disaster. They often portrayed him as a crude extremist. Though Lincoln repeatedly promised not to interfere with slavery where it already existed, that promise did not matter. Slave-holding leaders understood something clearly. A government hostile to slavery's expansion threatened slavery's long future. The election campaign was fierce but fragmented. Lincoln's name was absent from ballots in some southern states, yet the North's population advantage mattered when votes were counted. Lincoln won the presidency with no Southern electoral votes. The result stunned the country. Celebration erupted in some northern cities. In much of the South, rage and fear spread instantly before Lincoln even took office. South Carolina voted to secede. Others followed. The Union was breaking apart because one man had been lawfully elected. Lincoln, still president-elect, now faced mortal danger. As he traveled east to Washington, Detectives uncovered a possible assassination plot in Baltimore. He passed through the city under secrecy. Enemies mocked him as cowardly. Supporters insisted caution was wise. Either way, America had never seen such tension before an inauguration. When Lincoln arrived in Washington, the Capitol felt exposed. Soldiers guarded key points. Rumors swirled. Hotels buzzed with intrigue. Some doubted he could govern at all. Many elites dismissed him as provincial. They would underestimate him repeatedly. On March 4, 1861, beneath a cloudy sky, Lincoln delivered his first inaugural address. He spoke not with fury but firmness. He promised not to interfere with slavery where it existed. He declared secession legally void. He appealed to memory, reason, and shared identity. Then he ended with words that still resonate: "We are not enemies, but friends." He invoked the better angels of our nature, but angels were losing ground to artillery. Inside the White House, Lincoln inherited chaos. Federal forts in the South were threatened. Cabinet rivals distrusted each other. The army was tiny, the treasury strained. Foreign powers watched, newspapers attacked daily. He had no executive experience on such a scale. Yet Lincoln possessed qualities no resume could measure. He learned rapidly. He listened widely. He tolerated criticism. He could absorb pain without immediate retaliation. He knew when to delay and when to strike. He understood public opinion mattered in a democracy at war. He also knew words shape morale as much as bullets. Many around him were more polished, few were wiser. His cabinet itself included former rivals Seward, Chase, Bates, strong egos, competing ambitions. Different factions. Lincoln managed them not by dominating every room, but by mastering the larger purpose. He could let men talk, then quietly decide. He could endure insult if useful. He could remove allies if necessary, and though often mocked for humor in crisis, he used humor as armor. Jokes gave him breath inside pressure that would have crushed others. Then came the immediate crisis. Fort Sumter, a U.S. garrison in Charleston harbor, lacked supplies. If Lincoln abandoned it, secession gained legitimacy. If he reinforced it militarily, war might begin. He chose a narrow path: send food, not aggression, notify authorities, force the Confederacy to choose first blood. They did. When Confederate guns opened fire in April 1861, Lincoln's presidency transformed overnight. No longer merely a politician, he became a wartime leader. No longer managing factions, he was summoning armies. No longer debating the future of the Union, he was fighting for its survival. He called for 75,000 volunteers. Crowds surged to enlist. Drums rolled. Flags waved. Then more slave states seceded, including Virginia. The conflict widened. Lincoln now faced a trial almost impossible to imagine. How do you preserve liberty while waging war? How do you save constitutional government while suspending some freedoms? How do you command generals who ignore urgency? How do you bear casualty lists by the thousands? How do you keep border states loyal? How do you prevent Britain or France from recognizing the Confederacy? How do you evolve morally while governing pragmatically? These questions would define him. At first, many saw him as temporary, a backwards placeholder, a lucky election winner, a man too gentle for bloodshed. Yet as cannon smoke thickened over the Republic, Lincoln rose. Slowly. Painfully. Imperfectly. But unmistakably. He visited troops. Read dispatches late into the night. Studied military maps. Wrote letters of astonishing tenderness to grieving families. Dismissed failing generals. Endured ridicule. Buried a son while leading a nation at war. He became larger because events demanded largeness. History sometimes selects unexpected instruments. A polished aristocrat might have shattered under the SDRAINA celebrated conqueror might have crushed liberty to save power. Lincoln, shaped by hardship and humility, bent without breaking. And the people, even when angry with him, increasingly sensed it. He belonged to them. He was not marble, he was human. Tired eyes, heavy steps, deep lines, a face carrying the war before the war was won. The next chapter would test him further than any speech or election ever had. Young men were marching, states were arming. Families were dividing, and soon, across fields from Virginia to Tennessee, America would discover what civil war truly costs. Because Lincoln had risen, now he would have to endure. What if the first shots of the American Civil War were fired before sunrise, by men who once called themselves countrymen? What if the war that would kill hundreds of thousands began not with a massive invasion, not with a glorious charge, but with a lonely fort surrounded by dark water and waiting guns? And what if, in those final silent hours before dawn, no one truly understood that the United States was about to enter for years of blood, fire, hunger, and grief? This is the story of Fort Sumter, the place where compromise died, the place where hesitation ended, the place where America fired upon itself. Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, was beautiful to the eye. Blue water shimmered beneath coastal light. Sea wind moved across the harbor. Ships drifted in and out of one of the South's proudest ports. Elegant homes and wealthy streets stood nearby, built in part on generations of slave labor and cotton wealth. But beneath the beauty lived fury. South Carolina had long been one of the fiercest defenders of slavery and state sovereignty. Many of its leaders believed the federal government threatened their way of life. They saw Lincoln's election in 1860 not as a routine political defeat, but as a mortal warning. Before Lincoln even entered the White House, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Church bells rang. Crowds cheered. Cannons boomed in celebration. Flags changed. Speeches promised freedom from Northern control. But inside Charleston Harbor, one stubborn symbol of federal authority still remained. Fort Sumter, the unfinished brick fort, stood on an artificial island near the harbor entrance. Strong walls rose above the water. Designed for coastal defense, it was impressive but not fully ready for war. Inside were United States soldiers under the command of Major Robert Anderson. Anderson was a Kentuckian, born in a slave state, disciplined, respected, and cautious. Ironically, he had once taught artillery tactics to another officer who would soon oppose him. P.G.T. Beauregard, now teacher and student, stood on opposite sides of history. Anderson knew danger was closing in initially. Federal forces in Charleston had occupied Fort Moultrie, an older and more vulnerable position on the mainland. Its defenses were weak, exposed, and difficult to hold against local militia. So in December 1860, under cover of darkness, Anderson made a bold decision. He secretly moved his small command from Fort Moultrie to Fort Sumter. Charleston awoke furious. To secessionists, this was betrayal. To Union supporters, it was prudence. To everyone else, it was a sign the crisis had entered a new stage. South Carolina authorities quickly seized other federal property arsenals, post offices, military sites, but Fort Sumter remained in U.S. hands, and now it stood surrounded. Across the harbor, batteries rose. Cannons were positioned on Morris Island, Sullivan's Island, James Island, and floating batteries, guns pointed inward from multiple directions. Fort Sumter was becoming an island prison. Inside the fort, life turned grim. The garrison numbered only around 80 to 90 men. Supplies were limited. Construction was incomplete. Food dwindled. Constant labor was required to strengthen defenses. Men slept under strain. They repaired walls, mounted guns, counted rations, watched enemy positions grow stronger each week. No one knew whether relief would come. No one knew whether Washington would act. At that moment, the United States still had two presidents in succession. James Buchanan remained in office until March 1861. He believed secession illegal but doubted he had authority to stop it decisively, his hesitation deepened the crisis. He attempted to send relief once, aboard the civilian vessel Star of the West in January 1861. As the ship approached Charleston Harbor, cadets from the Citadel and shore batteries fired on it. The ship withdrew. Many historians consider those shots among the first hostile gunfire of the conflict. Still, no full war had begun. Fort Sumter remained isolated. Weeks passed, then Abraham Lincoln took office. He inherited a collapsing Union, a divided cabinet, a weak army, and an impossible question: what should be done about Fort Sumter? If he evacuated the fort, it might signal surrender and encourage more secession. If he reinforced it with warships and troops, open war could begin immediately. If he delayed too long, starvation would decide for him. Lincoln chose a narrow, deliberate course. He would send provisions, food, not invasion. He informed South Carolina authorities that a relief expedition intended to resupply hungry soldiers. The message was political brilliance. If Confederates allowed supplies through, federal authority endured. If they fired first, they would bear responsibility for opening war. In Montgomery, Alabama, where the Confederate government first sat, leaders debated urgently. Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederate States, understood the stakes. Allowing Sumter to remain under the U.S. flag in Charleston Harbor was humiliating, yet attacking risked uniting the North behind Lincoln. After consultation, the order came: demand surrender. If refused, open fire. The man selected to command Confederate bombardment was General P.G.T. Beauregard, once Anderson's student. Now his opponent. History has a taste for irony. On April 11, 1861, Confederate envoys approached Fort Sumter under flag of truce and demanded surrender. Anderson declined. He explained he would evacuate soon if not resupplied, but could not surrender honorably under demand. Negotiations continued through the night. Around 3:20 a.m. on April 12, Confederate officers returned one final time. Anderson again refused immediate surrender. They informed him bombardment would begin in 1 hour. Then they departed into darkness. Imagine those moments inside the fort: men checking weapons by lantern light, some writing quick notes, some praying, some joking to hide fear, some staring at the black outlines of enemy batteries across the water. The world was quiet. Then, at approximately 4:30 am, a shell asked into the sky. It burst above Fort Sumter. Signal shot. War had begun. Soon dozens of guns roared from every side. Flashes split the pre-dawn dark. Smoke rolled across the harbor. Iron screamed through the air. Brick shattered. Dust filled casemates. The bombardment continued hour after hour. Inside Sumter, Anderson's men waited before replying. They lacked manpower and powder to waste. Eventually they answered with controlled fire from selected guns. But they were outmatched. Confederate batteries held superior positions. Their crossfire was relentless. Charleston residents watched from rooftops, balconies, boats, and shoreline vantage points. Some treated it as spectacle. Elegant ladies reportedly observed with opera glasses. Gentlemen discussed trajectories. Crowds cheered exploding shells. War often begins as theater for those far enough from death. It never remains theater. Inside the fort, reality was different. Food was nearly gone. Barracks caught fire. Smoke became suffocating. Hot shot and shell fragments threatened magazines. The U.S. flagstaff was struck. Walls crumbled in places. Yet remarkably, during much of the bombardment, casualties were minimal. Thick masonry and cautious sheltering reduced immediate deaths. Still, exhaustion mounted. Anderson knew no meaningful relief had arrived in time. Union ships waited offshore but could not effectively intervene under conditions. Stormy seas and confusion complicated matters. By April 13, flames spread dangerously. Ammunition handling became perilous. The garrison was choking on smoke. White flags appeared intermittently amid chaos. Negotiations reopened. Terms were arranged. Anderson would evacuate with honors. He could salute the U.S. flag before departure. The garrison would depart by transport. Fort Sumter would pass to Confederate control. After roughly 34 hours of bombardment, the first battle ended. But even in surrender, tragedy struck. During the ceremonial 100-gun salute to the flag, an accidental explosion killed Union soldiers, among the earliest deaths directly associated with the war. It was a grim omen. Even ritual would draw blood now. Anderson and his men sailed north. Many were welcomed as heroes. They had held as long as possible. The flag lowered at Sumter became sacred symbol in the North. Lincoln acted immediately. He called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress rebellion. The response was electric. Crowds filled town squares. Men rushed to enlist. Bands played patriotic songs. Newspapers demanded action. Moderates who had doubted firmness now rallied. But the call for troops had another effect. Upper South states that had hesitated now faced a choice: support coercion of fellow Southern states or join the Confederacy. Virginia seceded. Then Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina. The conflict widened dramatically. What began in Charleston Harbor now stretched toward continental war. The capital of the Confederacy moved to Richmond, Virginia, much closer to Washington. Two rival governments now faced each other across a divided land. Fort Sumter itself became legend instantly. To Confederates, it was proof of sovereignty and resolve. To Unionists, it was an attack on the nation's flag and lawful authority. To enslaved people, it signaled that forces long building might finally shatter the old order. To foreign observers, it was shocking. Could the American Republic, so boastful of democracy, survive civil war? No one knew. Many predicted quick resolution. Some said 90 days. Some thought one decisive battle would settle matters. They did not understand the scale of what had awakened. Factories would soon become arsenals. Fields would become graveyards. Railroads would become military arteries. Rivers would become invasion routes. Cities would become hospitals. Families would become divided camps. And freedom itself would be redefined. The men at Fort Sumter could not yet see Gettysburg. They could not yet see Antietam cornfields soaked in blood. They could not yet see Atlanta burning. They could not yet see Lincoln dead in a theater. They could not yet see 4 million enslaved people moving toward emancipation. They only knew shells were falling. That is how great transformations often begin, not with clear prophecy, but confusion and smoke. There is another haunting truth about Fort Sumter. No one was killed outright by enemy fire during the bombardment itself. The first great clash of the Civil War opened with thunder but little blood. That brief mercy would not last. Soon the war would collect lives by the thousands, then tens of thousands, then beyond counting. Yet symbols matter, and Fort Sumter was one of the most powerful symbols in American history. It marked the end of compromise politics that had delayed the slavery crisis for decades. It forced citizens to choose sides. It elevated Lincoln from embattled politician to wartime president. It gave the Confederacy a dramatic beginning but also the burden of firing first. And it turned sectional hatred into organized war. Years later, after the Confederacy fell, the same Fort Sumter would witness another ceremony. The battered U.S. flag, once lowered in surrender, was raised again in victory. Robert Anderson himself returned to honor the moment. History had completed a brutal circle. But in April 1861, none of that was known. Only this was known: the guns had spoken. America had crossed the line. And there would be no easy road back.